Ladies and gentlemen, have you ever stood at the edge of a storm, your heart pounding with doubt, wondering if you'll make it through? Have you ever faced a moment so heavy that all you could do was fall to your knees and ask, "Why God? Why me?" Trusting God requires placing faith over fear, a profound principle that resonates across the spectrum of human experiences. Yet it is far easier said than done. Fear is a natural response, deeply ingrained in our survival instincts. When faced with uncertainty, our hearts race, our minds scramble for answers, and doubt takes center stage. But true faith isn't about denying fear's existence. It's about refusing to let fear dictate our actions, our thoughts, and our belief in something greater than ourselves. Faith doesn't silence fear, it surpasses it, creating a space where courage and trust can flourish despite uncertainty. Fear often stems from our desire to control outcomes. We want to see the full picture before taking a step, to know that everything will work out exactly as we hope. But life doesn't operate on our terms. It's unpredictable, filled with twists and turns that no amount of planning can prevent. Trusting God requires us to step out of that mindset, to relinquish control, and acknowledge that there is a higher power guiding the journey. This is not an easy task. It requires humility to admit that we don't have all the answers and bravery to move forward without them. Consider a moment in your life when fear gripped your heart. Maybe it was the loss of a job, a health scare, or a relationship teetering on the edge of collapse. In those moments, fear tells us to retreat, to build walls of doubt and despair around ourselves. It whispers that we are alone, that there is no way out, and that failure is imminent. But faith speaks a different language. Faith says, keep going. You are not alone. God is with you, even in this storm. Trusting God means listening to that voice of faith, even when fear is shouting louder. Faith over fear is not blind optimism. It's not pretending that challenges don't exist or that pain isn't real. Trusting God doesn't mean ignoring the storm. It means believing that the storm won't sink you. It's a declaration that while fear may be present, it doesn't have the final say. Faith reminds us that God's power is greater than our problems and that His promises are bigger than our doubts. Trusting Him means believing in His plan, even when we can't see the full blueprint. To trust God over fear is to embrace uncertainty with the assurance that He is in control. Take, for example, the story of Peter walking on water. When Jesus called him out of the boat, Peter stepped forward in faith, trusting that the impossible was possible through God. But as soon as Peter took his eyes off Jesus and focused on the raging waves, fear took over and he began to sink. This story is a vivid illustration of our daily battles between faith and fear. When we focus on the size of the storm, fear wins. But when we fix our eyes on God, we find the strength to keep walking. Fear often masquerades as practicality. It tells us to play it safe, to avoid risks, to stick to what we know. But trust in God often calls us to step into the unknown. It asks us to take risks, to pursue dreams that seem impossible, to forgive when it hurts, to love when it's hard, and to stand firm when everything around us feels shaky. Fear says, what if it doesn't work out? Faith responds, what if it does? Trusting God means leaning into the possibilities He places before us, even when they don't make sense from a worldly perspective. In trusting God, we learn that fear's power diminishes when we act in faith. Each step of faith, no matter how small, becomes a testimony to His faithfulness. It's in those moments of choosing faith over fear that we grow, not because the journey is easy, but because it refines us. Trusting God doesn't mean we won't face challenges. It means those challenges won't defeat us. Fear may try to paralyze us, but faith propels us forward, one step at a time. This principle becomes even more critical in the face of life's greatest uncertainties. When a loved one falls ill, when finances crumble, or when the path ahead seems completely obscured, fear rushes in to fill the void. It tells us to give up, to despair, to doubt God's goodness. But it's in those very moments that faith becomes our anchor. Trusting God doesn't erase the difficulty of the situation, but it provides a foundation of hope and strength. It reminds us that even when we don't know what the future holds, we know who holds the future. Faith over fear is also a choice we must make daily. It's not a one-time decision, but a constant realignment of our hearts and minds. Fear will come knocking again and again, but each time it does, we have the opportunity to respond with faith. This choice often requires intentional action, prayer, meditation, reading scripture, and surrounding ourselves with reminders of God's promises. It's in these practices that we cultivate a deeper trust in Him, a trust that sustains us even when fear threatens to overwhelm. When we trust God, we also gain a new perspective on fear itself. Instead of seeing it as a barrier, we begin to see it as an opportunity to grow closer to Him. Fear becomes a catalyst for faith, pushing us to rely not on our own strength, but on His. It's through the process of facing our fears with faith that we discover the depth of God's love, the power of His grace, and the steadfastness of His presence. Trusting God over fear doesn't guarantee a smooth path, but it does guarantee a guided one. He doesn't promise that we won't face storms, but He does promise to be with us in them. This assurance doesn't eliminate fear, but it gives us the courage to move forward despite it. It reminds us that our trust in Him is not misplaced, because He is faithful, He is good, and He is able. As we learn to trust God over fear, we also become witnesses to His power in our lives. Our testimonies of overcoming fear through faith inspire others to do the same. When people see us walking in peace amidst chaos, they begin to ask, how is that possible? And in those moments, we have the opportunity to point them to the source of our strength, God Himself. Ultimately, placing faith over fear is about surrender. It's about laying down our need to control, our doubts and our insecurities, and choosing to trust God completely. It's about believing that He is who He says He is, and that He will do what He has promised. This surrender is not a sign of weakness, but of strength. It's an acknowledgement that while we may not have all the answers, we know the one who does. Trusting God in every situation is a journey, not a destination. It's a process of growth, of learning to let go, and of discovering the freedom that comes from walking in faith. Fear may still try to creep in, but when we choose faith, we declare that our trust in God is greater than our fear of the unknown. And in that choice, we find peace, strength, and the courage to face whatever comes our way. Every challenge we face in life has a lesson embedded within it, and there is a profound purpose in pain. This truth may not always be evident in the heat of our struggles, but when we pause, reflect, and allow ourselves to trust in God, we begin to see the fingerprints of His work on our lives. Pain is an inevitable part of the human experience. We cannot escape it, avoid it, or wish it away. But what we can do is allow it to shape us, mold us, and transform us into the people we are meant to be. Pain often feels senseless in the moment. It arrives uninvited and leaves us questioning everything. We wonder why bad things happen, why we must endure heartache, and why life sometimes feels so unbearably heavy. In those moments, it is easy to lose sight of the bigger picture. But God sees the full tapestry of our lives, where we only see fragments. He knows that every thread of pain serves a purpose, even when we cannot comprehend it. One of the most difficult aspects of pain is the way it challenges our faith. When we are in the midst of a trial, it can feel as though God is distant or silent. We pray for relief, for answers, for a sign that He is still with us, and sometimes it feels as though nothing changes. But it is often in those silent, painful moments that God is doing His deepest work within us. He is stretching our faith, refining our character, and teaching us lessons that will carry us through the rest of our lives. Pain has a way of stripping us of our illusions of control. When life is going smoothly, it is easy to believe that we have everything figured out, that we are in charge of our destiny. But pain reminds us of our limitations. It brings us to our knees and forces us to acknowledge that we need God. In that humility, we find a strength that is not our own. We discover that when we are weak, He is strong and His grace is sufficient for every trial. The purpose of pain is not to break us, but to build us. It is through the fire of adversity that we are refined, much like gold in a furnace. The impurities are burned away, and what remains is pure, strong, and beautiful. This refining process is not easy, but it is necessary. It is through our struggles that we develop resilience, empathy, and a deeper understanding of ourselves and others. Consider the story of Joseph in the Bible. Betrayed by his brothers, sold into slavery, and falsely accused, Joseph endured years of pain and hardship. From the outside, it would have been easy to conclude that his life was nothing but a series of tragic events. But Joseph trusted in God's purpose even when he could not see it. In the end, his trials positioned him to save an entire nation from famine and reconcile with his family. What others intended for harm, God used for good. Joseph's story reminds us that our pain is not wasted. It is a part of a greater plan that we may not fully understand until much later. Pain also teaches us to rely on God in ways that we might not otherwise. When everything is going well, we can become self-reliant, forgetting that it is God who sustains us. But when we face challenges that are beyond our ability to handle, we are reminded of our dependence on Him. It is in those moments that our relationship with God deepens. We learn to lean on Him, to trust Him, and to seek His guidance. Pain becomes a pathway to intimacy with our Creator. In addition to shaping us, pain equips us to help others. When we have walked through trials, we gain compassion and wisdom that can only come from experience. We are able to empathize with those who are hurting and offer them the comfort and encouragement that we have received from God. Our scars become a testimony of His faithfulness, a reminder that healing is possible and that no situation is beyond redemption. Pain also has a way of clarifying our priorities. When we face loss or hardship, we are forced to confront what truly matters in life. The things we once held on to so tightly, material possessions, status, or the approval of others, suddenly seem insignificant in the face of what we have lost. Pain strips away the superficial and helps us focus on what is eternal. It reminds us that our ultimate hope is not in the things of this world, but in the promises of God. There is also a unique joy that comes from overcoming pain. When we emerge on the other side of a trial, we gain a sense of gratitude and perspective that can only come from hardship. We learn to appreciate the small blessings, to cherish the moments of peace, and to recognize the hand of God in our lives. Pain teaches us to celebrate life in all its complexity, to find beauty in the midst of brokenness, and to trust that even the darkest nights give way to morning. It is important to remember that while pain serves a purpose, it is not something that God takes pleasure in. He does not delight in our suffering, but He does use it for our good. He is a God of redemption, able to take even the most painful circumstances and turn them into something beautiful. This doesn't mean that the pain disappears or that the scars are erased, but it does mean that our pain is not the end of the story. In God's hands, it becomes a tool for growth, transformation, and healing. When we trust that there is a purpose in our pain, we are able to endure it with hope. This doesn't mean that we won't struggle or that we won't have moments of doubt, but it does mean that we can face our trials with the assurance that God is with us, that He is working all things together for our good, and that He has a plan for our lives. This hope gives us the strength to keep going even when the road is difficult. God's timing is a concept that challenges our understanding of time and patience. While we live in a world governed by clocks, calendars, and deadlines, God operates on a divine schedule that transcends human comprehension. Trusting in His timing requires faith, humility, and surrender, especially when life doesn't unfold the way we expect. This trust can be one of the hardest lessons to learn because it forces us to relinquish control and accept that we are not the ultimate authors of our stories. But His timing is always perfect, even when it feels delayed from our perspective. We live in an age of instant gratification. We want what we want, and we want it now. Technology and modern conveniences have trained us to expect quick results, whether it's ordering a package online or receiving an answer to a question. This mentality often spills into our relationship with God. When we pray for something healing, a breakthrough, or a blessing, we expect an immediate response. And when the answer doesn't come on our schedule, doubt and frustration can creep in. But God's timing is not dictated by our impatience. He works in seasons, not seconds, and his timing is always aligned with his purpose for our lives. One of the reasons God's timing can feel so difficult to trust is that waiting often involves discomfort. When we are in a season of waiting, it's natural to feel restless, anxious, or even forgotten. We may look around and see others receiving the blessings we are praying for, and this can lead to feelings of envy or discouragement. But God doesn't ask us to compare our journey to anyone else's. He asks us to trust Him. Just because someone else's blessing arrives before ours doesn't mean God has overlooked us. His timing is tailored to each individual, and what He has for us will come when the time is right. It's important to remember that God's delays are not His denials. Just because we don't see immediate results doesn't mean He isn't working behind the scenes. Often God is preparing us for the very things we are praying for. He is molding our character, strengthening our faith, and positioning us to receive His blessings in a way that will glorify Him and benefit us in the long term. Sometimes we think we're ready for something, but God knows otherwise. His timing protects us from stepping into situations prematurely where we might falter or fail. There are countless examples in Scripture of people who had to wait for God's timing. Abraham and Sarah waited decades for the fulfillment of God's promise to give them a child. Joseph endured years of slavery and imprisonment before rising to power in Egypt. David was anointed king as a young shepherd boy, but didn't ascend to the throne until much later. In each of these stories, God's timing may have seemed delayed, but it was always purposeful. The waiting periods were not wasted. They were times of preparation, growth, and alignment with God's will. While we wait on God's timing, we are often tempted to take matters into our own hands. This is a natural human response driven by impatience and the desire for control, but rushing ahead of God rarely leads to the outcome we desire. In fact, it often results in unnecessary complications and heartache. Consider the story of Abraham and Sarah. When they grew tired of waiting for God's promise of a child, they tried to fulfill it on their own terms by having Abraham father a child with Hagar. This decision led to strife and conflict that could have been avoided if they had trusted in God's timing. Learning to trust God's timing involves shifting our perspective on waiting. Instead of seeing it as a punishment or a delay, we can choose to view it as a season of preparation and growth. Waiting teaches us patience, a virtue that is often undervalued in today's fast-paced world. It also deepens our reliance on God as we learn to trust His wisdom and surrender our own timelines. Waiting allows us to develop a faith that is not dependent on immediate results, but is rooted in the unchanging nature of God. In our seasons of waiting, it's important to remain faithful in prayer and to continue seeking God's guidance. Prayer is not just about presenting our requests to God. It's also about aligning our hearts with His will. Through prayer, we find peace and reassurance that God is in control, even when we don't understand His timing. It's also essential to stay rooted in His Word, which reminds us of His faithfulness and provides countless examples of how He has worked in the lives of others. God's timing is often revealed in hindsight. When we look back on our lives, we can see how certain events unfolded in ways we couldn't have predicted, but were ultimately for our good. The job opportunity that came at just the right moment, the relationship that entered our lives when we were ready to cherish it, or the door that closed to protect us from a harmful path. These are all examples of God's timing at work. When we trust Him, we can rest in the assurance that He sees the bigger picture, even when we don't. There is also a profound sense of peace that comes from trusting God's timing. When we surrender our schedules and expectations to Him, we free ourselves from the burden of trying to control the uncontrollable. This doesn't mean we stop working toward our goals or abandon our dreams. It means we move forward with faith, knowing that God is directing our steps. This peace allows us to embrace the present moment rather than constantly striving for what's next. It helps us to appreciate the blessings we already have, even as we wait for what's to come. Sometimes God's timing involves saying no to something we deeply desire. This can be one of the hardest aspects to accept, but even His no is an act of love. He sees what we cannot and knows what is best for us. What feels like a rejection is often a redirection guiding us towards something better. Trusting His timing means believing that His plans are always good, even when they don't align with our own. As we trust in God's timing, we also become witnesses to His faithfulness. When His promises are fulfilled in our lives, they serve as a testimony to others of His goodness and sovereignty. Our stories of waiting and trusting can inspire others to hold on to their faith in their own seasons of uncertainty. In this way, God's timing not only impacts our lives, but also the lives of those around us. Trusting God's timing is not about passively waiting for things to happen. It's about actively trusting and obeying Him in the meantime. It's about doing our part, working hard, staying faithful, and being good stewards of what we've been given while leaving the outcomes in His hands. It's about walking forward in faith, even when the path ahead is unclear. Ultimately, God's timing reminds us that He is in control and that His plans are far greater than anything we could imagine. When we surrender our timelines to Him, we open ourselves up to His best for our lives. And while the waiting may be difficult, the blessings that come in His perfect timing are always worth it. Trusting His timing is a journey of faith, but it is one that leads to peace, growth, and the fulfillment of His promises. Trusting God requires surrendering control, a task that is often easier said than done. Human nature craves control, predictability, and certainty. We like to map out our futures, plan every step, and ensure that life unfolds according to our desires. But life is unpredictable, and more often than not, we find ourselves in situations where control slips through our fingers. In these moments, God asks us to let go, to surrender not just our plans, but also our fears, anxieties, and need for certainty. This surrender is not a sign of weakness, but of faith. It is a declaration that we trust God more than we trust ourselves, and that we believe His plans are better than anything we could imagine. Surrendering control doesn't mean we become passive or indifferent about life. It doesn't mean we stop working hard, making decisions, or pursuing goals. Instead, it means we release the illusion that we are the ultimate architects of our destiny. It means recognizing that while we can plant seeds and nurture them, it is God who causes them to grow. Surrender is about doing our part and trusting God to do His. It's about acknowledging that there are aspects of life we simply cannot control, and that's okay because God can. One of the greatest barriers to surrendering control is fear. We fear the unknown, failure, loss, and the possibility that things won't turn out the way we want. These fears can lead us to cling tightly to control, trying to force outcomes and manipulate situations to align with our desires. But the tighter we hold on, the more anxiety we create for ourselves. Surrendering to God means releasing those fears and replacing them with trust. It means believing that even if things don't go according to our plans, God's plans are still good. Surrendering control often requires a shift in perspective. Instead of viewing life's uncertainties as threats, we can choose to see them as opportunities to grow in faith. When we face situations that are beyond our control, we have a choice to spiral into worry or to lean into trust. This leaning into trust is an act of faith that says, God, I don't have all the answers, but I trust that you do. I trust that you are working for my good. Even when I can't see it, this mindset doesn't eliminate challenges, but it changes how we approach them. Letting go of control also involves surrendering our timelines. We often want things to happen on our schedules, whether it's achieving a career milestone, starting a family, or seeing a dream fulfilled. When delays occur, it's easy to feel frustrated or disheartened, but God's timing is not our timing, and His ways are higher than ours. Surrendering control means trusting that His timing is perfect, even when it doesn't align with our expectations. It means believing that He knows when we're ready to receive His blessings and when we need more time to grow. Another aspect of surrendering control is releasing the need for approval and validation from others. Many of us live our lives trying to meet the expectations of those around us, whether it's family, friends, or society as a whole. This need for approval can drive us to make decisions based on what others think rather than what God is calling us to do. Surrendering control means seeking God's approval above all else. It means tuning out the voices of the world and focusing on His voice, trusting that His guidance is all we need. Surrendering control also means letting go of the outcomes. We often pray for specific results, asking God to fulfill our desires in a particular way. While there's nothing wrong with presenting our requests to God, true surrender means accepting whatever answer He gives, whether it's yes, no, or wait. It means trusting that His plan is better than ours, even when it doesn't make sense in the moment. This kind of surrender requires humility, as we acknowledge that God's wisdom far surpasses our own. One of the most freeing aspects of surrendering control is the peace it brings. When we stop trying to micromanage every detail of our lives and place our trust in God, we release a heavy burden. We no longer have to carry the weight of trying to make everything perfect or ensuring that everything goes our way. Instead, we can rest in the assurance that God is in control and that He is working all things together for our good. This peace doesn't mean we won't face challenges, but it does mean we can face them with confidence, knowing that God is with us. The process of surrendering control often deepens our relationship with God. When we let go of our need for control, we create space for God to work in our lives. We begin to rely on Him in ways we never have before, seeking His guidance, strength, and wisdom. This reliance fosters intimacy with God as we learn to trust Him not just in the big decisions, but in the small, everyday moments as well. Surrender becomes an act of worship, a way of saying, God, I trust You with every part of my life. Surrendering control doesn't mean life will be free of difficulties. In fact, it often means walking through challenges that test our faith and push us to grow. But it also means we don't have to face those challenges alone. When we surrender to God, we invite Him into every aspect of our lives, allowing His power and presence to sustain us. This doesn't eliminate the storms, but it does give us an anchor to hold on to when the winds and waves threaten to overwhelm us. Trusting God through challenges is one of the most defining aspects of faith. Life is not a straight path of ease and comfort. It is filled with unexpected turns, obstacles, and trials that test our resilience, our character, and ultimately our faith. When we face these challenges, we are often tempted to rely on our own strength, wisdom, or resources to navigate them. But trusting God in these moments is an act of surrender that demonstrates our belief in His power, His presence, and His purpose for our lives. Challenges come in many forms: financial struggles, health crises, broken relationships, career setbacks, or even internal battles with doubt and fear. They are often accompanied by feelings of frustration, confusion, and helplessness. In these moments, it's natural to question why God would allow us to go through such difficulties. But trusting God means holding on to the truth that He is good, even when our circumstances are not. It means believing that He is with us, even when we feel alone, and that He is working in ways we cannot see, even when everything seems to be falling apart. One of the hardest aspects of facing challenges is the uncertainty they bring. When we are in the midst of a trial, we often don't know how or when it will end. This uncertainty can lead to anxiety and fear as we try to predict the outcome or control the situation. But trusting God through challenges means accepting that we don't have all the answers and that we don't need to. It's about letting go of the need to understand everything and instead leaning into the assurance that God does. Trusting Him means walking forward in faith, even when the path ahead is unclear. God doesn't promise us a life free from challenges. In fact, Jesus Himself said, "In this world you will have trouble. But take heart. I have overcome the world," John 16:33. Challenges are a part of the human experience, but they are not without purpose. They are opportunities for growth, refinement, and transformation. When we trust God through our trials, we allow Him to use those challenges to strengthen our faith, build our character, and deepen our relationship with Him. Every difficulty we face is an invitation to draw closer to God and to experience His faithfulness in new and profound ways. Trusting God through challenges also requires us to let go of the need to fix everything ourselves. As humans, we are problem solvers by nature. When faced with a challenge, our first instinct is often to take matters into our own hands. While there's nothing wrong with taking action, we must remember that our strength and wisdom are limited. Trusting God means recognizing our limitations and inviting Him into the situation. It's about praying for His guidance, relying on His strength, and seeking His will above our own. When we do this, we open the door for Him to work in ways that far exceed anything we could accomplish on our own. Another important aspect of trusting God through challenges is refusing to let fear take root. Fear is one of the most powerful emotions we experience, and it can paralyze us when we are faced with uncertainty or adversity. Fear whispers lies that make us doubt God's presence and His promises. But trusting God means choosing faith over fear. It means reminding ourselves of who God is, His power, His goodness, and His faithfulness, and standing on His word, even when fear tries to overwhelm us. Trust doesn't eliminate fear, but it gives us the courage to move forward in spite of it. God often uses challenges to reveal His power in our lives. When we are faced with situations that seem impossible, it is an opportunity for God to show us that nothing is too difficult for Him. Throughout Scripture, we see examples of God working miraculously in the midst of challenges. Moses and the Israelites stood before the Red Sea with the Egyptian army closing in behind them, but God parted the waters and made a way where there was no way. Daniel was thrown into the lion's den, but God shut the mouths of the lions and protected him. These stories remind us that God is not limited by our circumstances. When we trust Him, He can turn even the most difficult situations into testimonies of His power and faithfulness. One of the ways we can cultivate trust in God during challenges is by remembering His past faithfulness. When we look back on our lives, we can see the ways God has provided for us, guided us, and brought us through previous trials. These memories serve as reminders that He is the same God who will see us through our current challenges. Trusting God means believing that just as He was faithful before, He will be faithful again. It's about standing on the foundation of His unchanging character and His promises. Another key to trusting God through challenges is staying connected to Him through prayer and His Word. When we are in the midst of a trial, it's easy to become consumed by our circumstances and lose sight of God. But prayer is a lifeline that keeps us anchored in Him. It's a way to pour out our hearts, seek His guidance, and find comfort in His presence. Similarly, reading and meditating on Scripture reminds us of His promises and gives us the strength to keep going. God's Word is a source of hope and encouragement that sustains us when we feel weak or discouraged. Trusting God through challenges doesn't mean we won't feel pain or struggle with doubt. It's okay to acknowledge our emotions and to wrestle with our faith in difficult times. God is not afraid of our questions, and He invites us to bring our burdens to Him. Trusting Him doesn't mean we have to have it all together. It means we come to Him just as we are, with our fears, doubts, and brokenness, and place them in His hands. It's about leaning on Him when we don't have the strength to stand on our own. One of the most powerful aspects of trusting God through challenges is the peace it brings. When we surrender our worries and uncertainties to Him, we experience a peace that transcends understanding. This peace doesn't come from the absence of challenges, but from the presence of God. It's a peace that allows us to face adversity with confidence, knowing that God is in control and that He is working all things together for our good. Trusting Him doesn't mean the road will be easy, but it does mean we can walk it with assurance that we are not alone. Challenges often have a way of strengthening our faith and refining our character. When we trust God through difficulties, we develop perseverance, resilience, and a deeper dependence on Him. These qualities not only prepare us for future challenges, but also enable us to be a source of encouragement to others. Our stories of trusting God through trials can inspire and uplift those who are facing their own difficulties, pointing them to the hope and strength that come from Him. Ultimately, trusting God through challenges is about surrendering to His sovereignty and believing in His love. It's about recognizing that He sees the bigger picture and that His plans for us are good, even when we don't understand them. Trusting Him means holding on to the truth that He is for us, that He is with us, and that He is working all things for our ultimate good and His glory. It's about choosing faith over fear, hope over despair, and trust over doubt. And in that trust, we find the strength to face whatever challenges come our way, knowing that God is faithful and that He will never let us go. Recognizing that God has a purpose for everything is a transformative realization that shapes how we approach life's circumstances, especially the difficult and uncertain ones. When we acknowledge that nothing in life is random and that God is intricately involved in every detail, it changes our perspective. It allows us to find meaning even in pain, to trust even in confusion, and to hope even in despair. Understanding His purpose is not about having all the answers, it's about trusting that His plans are greater and that He is weaving all things together for good. Life is a tapestry, and we often see only the threads. Some are bright and beautiful, representing joy and success. Others are dark and tangled, symbolizing sorrow and struggle. From our limited perspective, it's easy to focus on the chaotic and painful threads and question why they exist. But God, as the master weaver, sees the entire picture. He knows how each thread contributes to the masterpiece He is creating. Trusting in His purpose means believing that He is at work, even when we cannot see the finished product. One of the most challenging aspects of understanding God's purpose is grappling with the reality of pain and suffering. It's natural to ask why a loving God would allow difficulties in our lives. But His purpose often involves growth, refinement, and preparation for something greater. Just as gold is refined by fire, our character and faith are strengthened through challenges. These experiences shape us, teaching us resilience, compassion, and dependence on God. They remind us that we are not self-sufficient and that we need His guidance and strength. God's purpose often extends beyond our individual lives. Sometimes what we endure is not solely about us, but about the impact our journey can have on others. Our struggles and victories can serve as a testimony of God's faithfulness, encouraging and inspiring those around us. When we go through trials, God can use our experiences to equip us to help others facing similar challenges. In this way, our pain is not wasted, it becomes a tool for healing and hope. Recognizing God's purpose also requires humility. We live in a world that values control and independence, and it can be difficult to surrender our desire to dictate how our lives unfold. Trusting that God has a purpose means letting go of the need to understand every detail and instead submitting to His sovereignty. It means acknowledging that His ways are higher than ours and that His wisdom surpasses our understanding. This humility allows us to rest in the assurance that He knows what He's doing, even when we do not. Patience is another critical aspect of trusting God's purpose. His timeline often differs from ours, and waiting can be one of the most challenging tests of faith. We may pray for a breakthrough, a resolution, or a blessing, only to feel like nothing is happening. But God's timing is always perfect. He knows when we are ready to receive what He has planned and when circumstances need to align for His purpose to be fulfilled. Waiting is not wasted time, it is a period of preparation, growth, and trust. God's purpose is not always immediately apparent. Sometimes we only understand it in hindsight, looking back on how events unfolded and realizing how He was at work all along. There are moments when what seemed like a setback or failure turns out to be a stepping stone to something greater. A closed door may lead to an opportunity we never imagined. Trusting His purpose means believing that He is guiding our steps even when the path seems unclear or winding. Faith plays a central role in recognizing God's purpose. It's about believing that He is good and that His plans are for our benefit, even when circumstances suggest otherwise. Faith doesn't eliminate doubt or fear, but it helps us move forward despite them. It allows us to hold on to hope when life feels uncertain, and to trust that God is working behind the scenes, orchestrating everything for our good and His glory. Recognizing God's purpose also brings a sense of peace. When we understand that He is in control and that nothing happens by accident, we can let go of anxiety and rest in His promises. This doesn't mean life will be free of challenges, but it does mean we can face them with confidence, knowing that they serve a greater purpose. This peace allows us to navigate life's ups and downs with a steady heart, trusting that God's plan is unfolding as it should. One of the most profound aspects of God's purpose is its ability to redeem. No matter how broken or hopeless a situation may seem, God has the power to bring beauty from ashes. He can take our mistakes, failures, and pain and use them for good. This redemption is a testament to his grace and love. It reminds us that nothing is beyond his ability to transform and that every experience, no matter how difficult, has value in his hands. Trusting in God's purpose also encourages gratitude. When we recognize that everything in our lives, both the blessings and the challenges, serves a purpose, we can begin to see his hand in every detail. Gratitude shifts our focus from what we lack to what we have, from our struggles to his provision. It allows us to celebrate the small victories, cherish the moments of joy, and find beauty even in the midst of difficulty. Gratitude opens our eyes to the ways God is at work, even when his purpose is not yet fully revealed.
In every moment of life, whether it's filled with joy or hardship, triumph or trial, one truth remains unshaken. Trusting God is the foundation that anchors our souls. This trust is not blind. It's rooted in his unchanging character, his unfailing promises, and the evidence of his goodness that we see all around us. Trusting God is not just about believing in him when life is good. It's about holding on to him when life is hard. It's about surrendering our fears, doubts, and plans to the one who sees the beginning and the end, the one who knows the purpose behind every step we take. When we place our trust in God, we are declaring that we believe he is in control. We are saying that his plans for our lives are greater than anything we could imagine, that his wisdom surpasses our understanding, and that his love is unending. Trusting God means acknowledging that life won't always be easy, but we are never alone. He walks with us in the valleys and celebrates with us on the mountaintops. He doesn't promise a life free from challenges, but he promises his presence through them all. Life's uncertainties and trials often leave us questioning the purpose of our pain or the reasons behind closed doors. But trusting God means accepting that even when we don't have the answers, he does. His purpose is woven into the fabric of our lives, even in the moments we don't understand. He uses our struggles to refine us, to grow our faith, and to prepare us for something greater. Nothing is wasted in his hands. Our victories and defeats, our joys and sorrows, all serve a divine purpose. Choosing to trust God doesn't eliminate fear or doubt, but it gives us the courage to rise above them. It reminds us that we don't have to carry the weight of the world on our shoulders because he is carrying us. Trust brings peace in the storm, strength in the struggle, and hope in the waiting. It reminds us that we are part of a bigger story, one that God is writing for his glory and our ultimate good. As we navigate the complexities of life, let us remember to keep trusting God, no matter the situation. Let us trust him with our successes, knowing that they are a result of his blessings. Let us trust him with our failures, believing that he can redeem even our mistakes. Let us trust him in our waiting, knowing that his timing is perfect. Let us trust him in our pain, believing that he is with us and will bring purpose out of our trials. And let us trust him with our future, resting in the assurance that he holds it securely in his hands. When we live with this trust, we experience a freedom and a joy that the world cannot give. We are no longer bound by fear of the unknown because we know the one who knows it all. We walk forward in faith, confident that he is guiding our steps, and in trusting God, we discover the fullness of life he intends for us. One filled with hope, purpose, and the peace that surpasses all understanding. So trust him in every situation and watch him work wonders in your life. Trust God. Lean on him. Walk forward, not in fear, but in faith. And watch what he will do in your life. Thank you. Thank you.